Hello everybody, my name is Lorraine Hammond and I'm the President of Learning Difficulties Australia, and I'm excited to be eventually presenting one of these sessions for you. I follow in the footsteps of some very kind and generous folk who have given up their time to present a webinar for LDA, which we've been able to present to you. If you're not a member of LDA, I certainly encourage you to do something about that, because we are a fabulous organisation, and apart from the webinars, we have a journal, we have a bulletin, and there are many ways to connect with us and to continue the work that we do to support young people with learning difficulties. So whether you're here as a parent, as a teacher, as a speech pathologist, as an allied health professional, welcome. I'm going to talk to you about explicit instruction, and I've got a particular focus today on what you actually say. I work at Edith Cowan University. Ordinarily, I'd be doing this with my colleague and friend Brooke Wardana. She will make an appearance in the video, but it's just me today. But I do want to acknowledge her because these are some slides that we put together for something else. And so you've just got me today, but she's here in spirit. So I have some learning intentions, and at the end of this session, I'm hoping you'll be able to really explain the theoretical underpinnings of explicit instruction and direct instruction. Identify the role of clear and unambiguous communication in teacher-led instructional approaches, and have a go at some task analysis, because if you want to teach explicitly, you really do have to do this. So here are some words that I want you to imagine you have to teach to a class or to a student. How are you going to go about doing that? I mean, what do they have in common? They all start with the letter R, but what would you do with those words? Have you got an idea? Well, we'll come to that in a moment in terms of how you decide to teach these words, because there's a lot of decisions to be made here. But first of all, can I introduce you to the first big idea of today? And that is that research is the only defensible foundation for educational practice. What we do, what we say to students counts the most, so we have to get it right. So the question is, which profession? The history of the profession has never been a particularly attractive subject, and for one reason for this is that it's so unbelievably deplorable a story. For century after century, all the way into the remote millennia of its origins, the profession got along by sheer guesswork and the crudest sort of empiricism. It is hard to conceive of a less scientific enterprise among human endeavours. What are you thinking? Virtually anything that could be thought up was tried out at one time or another, and once tried lasted decades or even centuries before giving it up. It was, in retrospect, the most frivolous and irresponsible kind of human experimentation, based on nothing but trial and error, and usually resulting in precisely that sequence, trial and error. What do you think it is? Well, it's medicine. And you might have thought it was about education, because that's what we're talking about today. But in fact, it's medicine. While we regard medicine in the scientific community as something that's strongly aligned with evidence-based practice, it wasn't always this way. You know, we worked our way through many unusual practices that are based on superstition, anecdote, snake oil. You know, and you think about it these days, there's still a lot of that going on, but you hope that when you go to your medical practitioner, whatever you're prescribed or whatever is offered to you is actually based on what the research says. We wouldn't be overly happy if our medical practitioner, you know, recommended something that they learnt about when they were an undergraduate student, particularly if they've been doing the business of doctoring for some time. So educational decisions need to be made on precisely the same basis. So research is the only defensible foundation for educational practice. So here's the second big idea. We make choices when we teach. So what did you think in terms of those spelling words? What were you going to do? The most fundamental decision you had to make was whether you were going to take more of an instructivist approach, which means you were going to directly teach the students, and go about that in a particular way, which is what we're going to talk about today. Or maybe it was more of a constructivist approach, and that is providing students with a series of activities which you would hope that they would come to their own understanding of how to spell those words themselves. So we start off by making the first choice, don't we? Now, I'm suggesting this isn't a great choice. It's a spelling activity grid that I saw recently in a school, and there are lots of activities here. Lego is my personal favourite because my son loves Lego. I doubt very much that he would be using it to spell words, but anyway, this is something that a teacher has put together, and apart from down here circling the sound, there's really not too much redeemable about this particular grid of activities in terms of actually teaching spelling. So I guess the concerning thing, and my face might be obscuring it right now, is that the children are instructed to circle the phonemes. And that's all very well and good if they actually know what a phoneme is and whether there's a particular phonic sequence, if you like. So all the words are CK words or AI words or so on. There's some sort of pattern that the children can kind of figure out for themselves. So I'm not endorsing this approach, but I am saying that a more constructivist approach would look a little bit like this. The approach that I use is that which is aligned to the research literature, and so I do a lot of professional learning and work in schools around explicit and direct instruction, and there is a difference between the two, and they're often very misunderstood. So when we're talking about explicit instruction, and bear in mind we're a very broad church in Australia, we're talking about the work ultimately of Dr. Barak Rosenshine, and it's unscripted. So whether you are an advocate of Charles Hughes and Anita Archer's book on explicit instruction, or you prefer the work of John Hollingsworth and Dr. Sylvia Ybarra, whose explicit direct instruction book, EDI, is available and very, very accessible, or you're using direct instruction, which is lowercase d, lowercase I, they are all terms for explicit instruction, and they have more in common than not. There's some variations between them, but there's a lot that they have in common, the most important of which is that they are not scripted. Whereas direct instruction, capital D, capital I, big DI as it's often referred to, commercial materials like spelling mastery, reading mastery, corrective reading, connecting maths concepts, they come out of Scientific Research Associates, the publishing arm of the work of Siegfried Engelmann. So I use something called Let's Decode, which we'll look at in just a moment. And there's also the work of Dr. Rhonda Farquhar, who is Australian and has books on elementary maths mastery and junior elementary maths mastery that, like Let's Decode, is semi-scripted. So they fit into the category broadly of direct instruction, both of which have good research support behind them. So if you're teaching explicitly, whether it's EI or DI, you start with a big question, and that is, what is the most efficient way to teach each skill? Not how do children typically learn each skill. So we're really focusing on the most efficient way to teach it. And in doing so, we really do have to break everything down. So this is the theory of instruction upon which direct instruction is based. So Engelmann and Carnine put forward this theory, and then it aligns perfectly with the work around DI. So the idea with DI is you are stepping into a classroom, you are maximising learning through controlling the learning environment. And the first thing that you have to consider is, what is it you're going to teach? Now, if you are using a scripted product like Spelling Mastery, that's all done for you. But if you're doing it explicitly, you've got to think of that yourself, and that's hard for people. So you have to analyse the knowledge systems. So that's deciding on your big ideas and your sequence of instruction. And that's what I'm going to demonstrate for you around spelling today. Then have to consider, as you step into that classroom, how you are going to modify or control the learning environment through the way that you teach. And so through your fast-paced instruction, through your signals, through the fact that the children will be responding a lot, you actually control learning. You control the learning environment. And so that's analysis of behaviour. And finally, we have to give some thought to what is it we're actually going to say. And that's why a scripted product is easier. in some respects, because we have to deliver instruction that is clear and unambiguous. And I'll give you my favourite example. So when I go into schools, I talk about the split digraph until people tell me otherwise. And then they might tell me that it's fairy-y, magic-y, ninja-y, bossy-y. I don't know whether I've forgotten any of the E's, but they all sound quite different if you're 5 or 6 and you're learning that particular generalisation. So I suggest to schools that you stick to one, because otherwise fairy in one classroom and bossy in the other is going to mean something completely different to the children. Also, if you think about that rule, then there's some understanding that has to be gained before children can really appreciate it. So you deconstruct the particular rule. You look at if there's an E at the end of the word on the word mate. Yes, there's an E, so that vowel says its name. So the name is A, so the word is mate. In the word mat, there's no E at the end of the word, so the vowel says its sound. What's the sound of that letter at? So the word is mat. Think about the language that I just used, because all of that has to be pre-taught to children before they can put it all together and appreciate the rule. So what is explicit instruction? Well, if I'm coming into your classroom and I'm watching you teach, I'll be looking for 3 things according to the work of Barak Rosenshine. Number 1, I'll be looking to see that whatever it is you are teaching, you have taken and broken down into very small steps. I'll also be looking to see that you are periodically checking in with the students to see how they're going, because otherwise you're teaching up the front and you're not getting any feedback from them. So how do you know how they're going and whether or not they're actually coping? And then finally, you'll be achieving active and successful participation by all students. Now, what that means is they will be doing something. So whether they're responding back to you, they're pair sharing, they're writing something on a whiteboard, they're responding orally to a question, they're doing something. And if they're doing something, they're more likely to be learning than having mentally checked out to their happy place if they're just sitting passively in your class. So explicit instruction is based on the information processing model. And I like to remind people that Dr. John Sweller had a lot to do with this, and he's still with us, but Vygotsky died in 1934, and Piaget, who you probably learnt about at university, died in 1980. So this is a more contemporary way of looking at how the brain learns. And we take in a lot of information. You're listening to me now. You would have heard the sirens before. Whenever I do a podcast or a webinar, there's always a siren. So you had to blot out that information, or maybe you just didn't even hear it at all. So you take in information, and if it's important, you have to pay attention to it. Otherwise, you forget it instantaneously. So imagine, if you will, we're in a classroom and I'm teaching you something and it's a bit tricky. So the next step is to move it into working memory, and that's where you do your thinking. But the problem in our human brains is working memory is finite and fixed. And so number 1, we have to hold information in there if we're going to do anything with it. And we can't remember too many items, 4 to 5 items maybe for children. So it becomes a little bit of a neurological juggle where you're holding stuff in your working memory while also trying to solve problems. And that becomes an issue. So the goal for us as a teacher is to get in between working memory and long-term memory, and through our instruction, find a way to get it from working to long-term memory. And then periodically require kids, having encoded it in long-term memory, to retrieve it and think about it and further embed it in long-term memory. So explicit instruction does 2 things. Number 1, it says, okay, let's get all the important stuff into long-term memory. So if I'm going to teach you a tricky spelling rule, there's a lot of stuff I've got to get into your long-term memory first. You need to know what a vowel and a consonant is, for example. So when you're trying to figure out whether to apply a spelling rule to a word, if you're juggling in your working memory knowledge, such as short vowel, long vowel, consonant, vowel, suffix, prefix, this is all the language we often associate with spelling, then you won't be able to focus on solving the spelling rule, if you like. There'll be too much going on. So what we try to do with explicit instruction is get it into long-term memory and then ease the demands on working memory, because the brain can go and retrieve it from long-term memory and it's there. So here's the 3rd big idea. and that low student achievement is an adult problem, not a student problem. So currently I'm working in the Kimberley of Western Australia, and it would be tempting sometimes to sort of give up on kids because they're usually in middle and upper primary and they can't read and they can't do maths, and it really is a challenge. But in fact, all children at any age can be taught, as can adults. It's just harder the older they are because we need a more intense dose of whatever it is we're teaching. And we have to make sure what we are teaching is in fact evidence-based, otherwise we're wasting everybody's time. So all children can achieve school success when we provide them with highly effective teachers and a supportive learning environment. And if you think about the work of somebody like Eric Hanushek, he can measure the impacts that we have as teachers, and some teachers will get through half a year's instruction in 1 year, and other teachers will get through 1.5 years worth of instruction in 1 year, and the children will make commensurate gains. So the focus really has to be on getting our instruction right, because all children can indeed be helped. So let's go back to those words that we talked about before. And if we're going to treat these explicitly, which is what we're going to do, then we need to break them down into their precursor skills. So I can honestly say to you, when I first started teaching, my response to a spelling mistake would have been, as a secondary teacher, to circle it, write the word out in big red letters, and magically hope somehow that by looking at it, the child or the young person would automatically be able to spell it correctly the next time. Despite being an excellent speller, I didn't have a hope in Hades of actually explaining to kids why words were spelt the way that they were, because that wasn't part of my undergraduate training when I became a teacher, and it unfortunately is the case for many teachers. So if you think about that, asking me to explicitly teach these words and the rules that underpin them would have been impossible. And yet that's what explicit instruction requires you to do. It requires a high level of teacher knowledge. So let's just look at these words. I've broken them into syllables because every syllable has a vowel or a vowel letter. If you want to spell a word you've never seen before, then breaking it down into its individual phonemes is usually the first thing that you will do. So you need to be able to do that. Then you need to examine the sounds, the vowel sounds in the word, and ascertain whether it's a long vowel or a short vowel or an R-control vowel, because that, again, that's knowledge, but that will help you to spell that particular word. So they will have consonants. So obviously we need to know what consonants are, and then we need to know graphic phonemic correspondences or letter sounds. So at, or. So I've broken it down. So that's something we're going to have to teach students as well. And then we've got base words, and base words are really useful when it comes to teaching spelling. And so from an early age, if you can introduce the concept of a base word, it will help your students enormously. And then, of course, in some words that I presented to you, there is indeed a morphograph, a suffix. And those suffixes, because we have a phonological morphographical language, not only are spelled a certain way, but they have meaning. So ED has already happened, ING is happening now, and ER is the job of, which we can teach to children as well. So then I'm going to put them into some kind of order, because let's face it, if I had to teach it, there might be a logical process to go through. The first is probably going to be a base word, as I'd indicate with the gesture, plus ED to the children. So it would be a base word, ED. Then there's a word like riding, which has a base word, and then we're actually adding a suffix starting with a vowel. So there's a little rule there that we'd have to teach to students. Then we've got my favourite spelling rule, the 1-1-1 rule. This is the one that sends most people weak at the knees. So in a one-syllable word with one vowel ending in one consonant, double the final consonant if the suffix begins with a vowel. Now, when Brooke and I do this with our university students, they glaze over, because look at that explanation: syllable, vowel, consonant, double, suffix, vowel. There's a lot going on there, isn't there? So if you're in cognitive overload, imagine how the children are faring, not particularly well. There's another example of the 1-1-1 rule. And then finally, in the word rattle, it's got 2 syllables. And the consonant LE becomes its own syllable at the end of the word, and the final E is always silent, but it creates a particular sound, and there is indeed also a schwa in there. If you want to teach children what a schwa is, then they can apply this to this rule too. So you need to teach the precursor skills, or don't teach the precursor skills, which is what I often see in classrooms. This is what I've observed recently. Let's go to a couple of different examples. So teachers will often say things like, what's a prime number? And they wait patiently. Well, not so patiently. Get a bit grumpy. Come on, we did this last week. What's going on? What's the prime number? And of course, you know, some of the children aren't sure, so they don't say anything because, you know, when you're in upper primary or high school, you'll die of embarrassment if you get it wrong. And so teachers wait a little while and they don't like the silence, so they fill the void. And they say something unhelpful like, well, is 3 a prime number? If you don't know what a prime number is, how do you know whether 3 is a prime number? So spot this next time you're in a classroom, or catch yourself doing it when you're teaching. A better way to go, and here I'm focusing in on instructional language, is to say a prime number is any number divisible by itself and 1. Everybody, what's the prime number? And then I leave the answer on the screen because it's not a secret and clearly you're not sure, so just read it back off the screen to your partner. So I teach first. Then I might say 3, 5 and 7 are prime numbers because they are only divisible by 1 or themselves. Tell your partner why 3 is a prime number and think of one new prime number. And if you're really stuck, the answer's on the screen. Then I get the children to pair share, and then I'd individually check 2 children, checking for understanding, non-volunteers, to see how they're going and how I'm going. That would be better than saying what's a prime number. And I'm sure I would have been guilty of this at some point in my career, asking secondary students, so what is persuasive writing? Well, good luck with that. Because, you know, if it's an off NAPLAN year, they probably haven't done it for a while, and teachers will ask, what is persuasive writing? Or who knows what persuasive writing is? And then follow it up with this unhelpful question. Well, okay, what are some persuasive techniques that you could use in an essay? Oh, gee, that's hard, isn't it? Statistics, imperative. There's other examples. Celebrity endorsement. But gee whiz, if you don't know, you don't know. And lots of kids don't know. So we have to teach first. So how would you teach children to segment words into phonemes? It's kind of an intangible thing, isn't it? My students at uni really struggle with this. They know that phonological awareness is important, but how to actually teach it directly is not necessarily something that they feel equipped to do. So here we are. Here's our Elkin sound boxes, if you like, and here are 3 items that will fit neatly into them. F, O, N, S, A, N, S, O, K. So when we're breaking them into sounds, that's indeed what we are doing. So this is a format for segmenting, and this is segmenting for reading, but it does have a nice spin-off back to spelling, and it's from direct instruction reading, and it's called Let's Decode. It's something I do in schools. So we start off by modelling, and I'll say, girls and boys, listen, we're going to say words slowly. Every time I clap, you say the next sound. My turn. The word is run. Run. Everybody do it together with me. When I clap, you say the next sound in run. Run. The word is rob. The word is rest. Rest. And then I would practice each of those 3 words 3 times each to a total of 9 with you. We're all doing it together. Then I'll say, oh, and I'll choose a child. Every time I clap, you say the next sound in run. Get ready. And the child will say each sound. So model, lead, test is the instructional format around teaching segmentation and anything in direct instruction. And these are the words that I would use. What about explicit instruction? Well, here's Brooke Wardana. So what I'd like you to consider is, what is she teaching and what words is she using? This comes from the video Outside the Square. She does have a whole class. It's just that the kindergarten children, the 4-year-olds, aren't there when we did the filming. So this is the end of the year, so you can see because it's a Christmas sign in the background.
Okay, make a circle, big and round, everybody hold hands, don't sit down, hands by side. We're going to talk about a group of words now that are called nouns. Listen to Mrs. Wardana. A noun is the name of a person, place or thing. Everyone, what's a noun? A noun is the name of a person, place or thing. I want you to think of a noun, the name of a person, place or thing. Have it in your head ready to go. Everyone should have one. I'm going to put my drum in the middle and I'm going to get somebody to come up and tell me their noun. But you have to tap out the syllables in that word. Remember, a syllable is a beat in a word. Everyone, what's a syllable? A syllable is a beat in a word. So if my noun was starfish, I'd do this, wouldn't I? Starfish. 2. Okay, who's got a noun? Let's have a look. Have you got one, Levi? Up you come. Fantastic. How many syllables? Everyone get your drum ready. Let's do motorbike together. Motorbike. Let's head, shoulders, knees, toes, motorbike. 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 Lachlan, what's motorbike without the bike? Motor. What's it without the bike? Motor. Great job, great job. Have you got one, Tyler, to tap out for us? What's yours? Spider. Go.
So we'll stop just before the child who raised her hand gets a terrible blood nose. Did you focus on what Brooke said? Now, remember, it's Christmas time, so these children have been saying all year a noun is a name of a person. So they've heard Brooke do it many times, but she teaches first. And having defined what a noun is with gestures, the students then repeat the definition. She then defines what a syllable is, and the children repeat that as well. Then she demonstrates how to tap out syllables, and then the children tap out the syllables in a noun, and then they do heads, head, shoulders, knees and toes syllables as well. So look at the number of repetitions the children had, but also look that Brooke is teaching first, and she's defined each of these particular concepts. So that's something that she's had to figure out before she starts. And that's one of the things that makes explicit instruction quite challenging for people if you've never done it before. So let's go back to spelling. If you're going to teach a spelling rule or a generalisation, I'm going to suggest that you need to start at the bottom of what is going to become a house, and that's with phonological awareness. So you need to be identifying the number of syllables in words, then individual phonemes, then discriminating between long and short vowel sounds, and then identifying the position of phonemes in a word. Next step is to focus in on the phonics. So you need to know grapheme, phoneme correspondences, distinguish between vowels and consonants, and be able to identify the vowel sound in a word. The next layer of the house is morphology, and that doesn't apply to all spelling rules. So in some instances, you will be applying a morphographical spelling rule. And if you're going to do that, then you need to know about base words and suffixes and also articulate the meaning of these inflectional suffixes. So I took the slides out because I was a bit over in time, but we know that ER means job off. So teach, fix, swim, And so we'll be teaching that as well to the children. Then finally, you get to the spelling rule. The problem that I see many people make is they jump in with the spelling rule at the beginning and it's completely overwhelming. So if you think about cognitive load, you've just gone straight there because there's so many concepts within that particular spelling rule that children don't necessarily have under control. So what would you do? Well, you might start off by segmenting a word into its individual phonemes. And here's the language of instruction for you. Now, the first time I would have taught this, I would have probably written it out myself because I'm never sure. So what I would do is I would put something like this onto your interactive whiteboard in very small print that only you can read, because it's not about the kids reading, it's about you reading it. And so I would say, I'm going to say a word the slow way. Every time I say a sound, I will clap hands with my partner. You can be my partner. Now we're going to say a word the slow way. The word is cat. What word? Cat. Cat. Okay, and I might do another example. The word is mum. Okay, everybody, let's do this together. Get your partner. And then they would clap out the sounds in cat. Then I would say, okay, just Tim and Jess, they're a partnership. Your word is dog. What word? Dog. Show me. Go. Then I'll start manipulating sounds. What's the vowel sound in dog? Oh, is it long or short? Swap it for all the other vowel sounds. Dog, dag, deg, dig, dug. There you go. And so children would actually clap with their partner each of those sounds. We then have to identify the position of sounds in a word, and hoops are great if you don't like hoops, because I feel a bit like a travelling circus performer when I have my hoops with me. You can use placemats or something on the floor. What you're trying to indicate to students is that each item, whatever it is, represents a sound in a word. The teacher says, look, my turn, I'm going to show you how. I'm going to say a word the slow way. Every time I jump into a hoop, I will say a sound. My word is cat. What word? Cat. The first sound in cat is k. So I'm going to go k, at, and jump into each hoop. Now we'll do it together. Every time I jump into a hoop, you say a sound. The word is run. What word? Run. And you're prompting the students. Now, I've put the letter sounds there, but they don't see those at all. They just see blank circles. And the idea is to demonstrate to them that there are sounds in this word and we're breaking it down into individual sounds. So we go through an I do, a we do, and then a you do. We've also got to make sure that students know the difference between vowels and consonants, because otherwise you're using language that they don't necessarily understand. We know there are 5 letters in the alphabet, and we call them vowels. And then there are consonants, what we call the letters that are not vowels. So children need to know this to automaticity, because in their working memory, if they're trying to figure out is it a vowel or a consonant, they just need to know. It's knowledge. There's no way of figuring it out other than just knowing. So we must teach this to automaticity. So we can do a little thing around short vowels and long vowels. And this is one of my former students at uni, Rochelle, who's at Ellenbrook Primary School. This is what she does with her students.
What are our short vowel sounds? What are our long vowel sounds? A-E-I-O-U. All right, close your eyes. Up. Well done. Is a short vowel sound. A. A is a long vowel sound. I. Good stuff. I is a long vowel sound. E. E is a short vowel sound. O. O is a short vowel sound. O. Well done. A. A is a long vowel.
Okay, so we can play little games like that, and they're great because obviously there's a bit of movement involved as well. So the children are doing this every day, and you would start off by just identifying vowel sounds, and then you would embed the vowel sounds within a word. So rather than being at, the word would be mat, and the kids would have to go at to and duck down. So we're trying to build this to automaticity. Another thing you can do is to say, okay, girls and boys, I'll say a letter. If it's a vowel, you say deal. If it's a vowel, say no deal. And so very quickly you can scroll through some examples and the kids will know you'll know straight away whether the kids are getting the idea of it. Then we're going to move into actually assigning some letter sounds. And so whether you've got the grid on their whiteboards or whether they're simply just going to, with a whiteboard pen, put a circle every time they hear a sound in a word, that's usually the first step. Here's the instructional language. I'm going to write a word. First, I will sound out the word on my phoneme fingers. The word is cat. What word? Cat. Cat. Okay, and you're always sounding it out for them. Then you're saying, everybody do it together with me. Cat. Girls and boys, every time we hear a sound, we're going to put a dot on our whiteboard, or we're going to actually write the letter depending on how capable the students are. Now keep in mind cognitive load. It's no point if they're not sure how to form the letters, then struggling to figure out how to form them. So initially I might give them the letters on the interactive whiteboard, or if I have time and inclination and it's a small group, then I'll put magnetic letters on their whiteboard and they just have to drag down the correct letter. So we're always trying to remove the variable of cognitive load if that's just too much for them, because the focus here is, can they identify the sounds in a word and can they match the sounds to the letters? Then we move into suffixes. So a suffix is a letter or a group of letters that go at the end of a word to change their meaning. And here's the most common suffix and the easiest one to teach to very young children. 1 cat, 2 cats. 1 hen, 2 hens. So if you're going to teach this to students, here's a tip for success. When children are very young and they're trying to write words, they'll often omit the suffix. So you'll spend some time teaching them, I have lots of, and then it'll be dogs. And so they have to write the word dogs. So they write the base word dog and then they add the S. They're less likely to forget the S or to spell the word incorrectly, even though it's a short word. These are little people and they're getting used to spelling. So simplify it by putting the base word down first, then adding the information. Then we get into ED. Now, it's all got a different sound, hasn't it? So initially when we teach children what ED means, it means that something has already happened. So we've got the meaning of ED. Today I hop, yesterday I hopped. Today I jump, yesterday I jumped. So I'd start with that. And then I would let children know that ED can be pronounced 3 different ways, as in stopped. So there's the T sound at the end. In smiled, the D sound at the end. And then in start ud, we can hear the ud at the end. So same rule applies, put the base word down first and then add ED. Then we get to the 1-1-1 rule, okay? So if a word has 1 syllable, and we know what a syllable is because you saw Brooke define what a syllable is, and 1 vowel followed by 1 consonant, double the final consonant before adding a suffix beginning with a vowel. So we have to start off with some examples and some non-examples. I would do many examples first before I introduced a non-example, because what you're trying to do is to set the students up with a bit of a system. So in the word run, 1 syllable, 1 vowel, followed by 1 consonant, N, double the final consonant, tick, yes, before adding a suffix beginning with a vowel. Oh, I, as in ing. I need to double the consonant, as opposed to the word rain that it's got 1 syllable, it ends in 1 consonant, but there's more than 1 vowel. So we don't double the final consonant. So if we're going to explain this to young children, we need a set of steps, don't we, if we're going to do it explicitly. And remember, we've taught them what a base word is. They know what a syllable is. They know what a vowel is. They know what a consonant is. So we're creeping closer and closer towards the precursor skills for teaching this rule. Now, you can do it this way, or you can simply get a copy of Spelling Mastery, and that will step it out for you in exactly the same kind of way. So we'll have an example of the word swim, and we'll say, 1 syllable, 1 vowel, 1 consonant, so we double the final consonant. And the use of pictures is great initially for children. Versus the word jump, 1 syllable, 1 vowel, an M and a P, we don't double the final consonant. So we're back to where we started. I'm wondering whether you can indeed explain the theoretical underpinnings of EI and DI. If you're thinking the theory of instruction for DI and the information processing model for EI, you're right. They have more in common than not, the most important of which is you break it down, you task analyse. And that's the final point. Can you task analyse the precursor skills to read and spell words? Because not only do we need to task analyse them, but we need to incrementally teach them if children are to be successful. And obviously, the words that we use are absolutely critical. We don't want to confuse anybody. We need to choose examples and then non-examples that highlight what we're teaching. We need to have a very strong focus on modelling first, teaching first. There's no point saying, hey, everybody, who can remember this spelling rule? There's a good chance they can't. Okay, and then we need to make sure that we have incrementally taught each of those precursor skills. Thank you so much for your time. Again, if you're not a member of LDA, please come and join us. We have many exciting things on the horizon and we would absolutely love you to be part of it. Thank you.